What is the exposure triangle? Let's find out. Now, the exposure triangle is everything you need to know about photography, and every camera in the world uses it, whether it gives you access to these settings or not. Now, mobile phones and this box Brownie, for example, have pretty much one setting. I can take a picture by flipping the switch or tapping a screen, but the cameras aren't giving us access to any more settings beyond that. SLRs, DSLRs, bridge cameras and some compacts will give us access to those, and we can make some changes to change the way the images that we take are exposed. Let me explain. The exposure triangle is made up of three things. That is the aperture, the shutter speed, and the sensitivity, or ISO. Now, if we look at the aperture first, we'll see that the aperture is a series of blades that lives in the lens itself. And those control light coming into the camera, but they also control how much of your image is going to be in focus. Now, how open or closed the aperture is measured in something called f-stops. The larger the number, the smaller the hole through the lens, the lower the number, the bigger the hole through the lens. And we can remember these as fractions. So for example, f8. Well, if we think of it as 1/8, so the diameter of the lens is down to 1/8 of its original size. That's a fairly small hole. f11, well, it's 1/11, so 1/11th the diameter of the lens, an even smaller hole. Whereas something like f4 or f2.8, that's close to half the diameter of the lens. That's a lot of light that's coming in. But the more light comes in, the less of the image is going to be in focus. So if we were to use something like f4 or f2.8 and we were shooting, say, a portrait, we focused on the person's eyes, the person themselves will be in focus, but the background will be completely out of focus. Whereas if we took the same picture using something like f11, the person and the background would be in focus. So using a smaller aperture, the f11s, the f16s, although they let less light in, they are absolutely brilliant for things like landscapes. The larger apertures let more light in and are great for things like portraits. And everything else, the f8s and the f6s, are great for just walking around town and taking pictures of street scenes. Now, the shutter speed controls how much light reaches the film or the sensor, but it also controls how much movement we have in an image. So for example, we could take our camera out to a waterfall and put it on a tripod and take a picture at, say, 1,000th of a second. That won't expose the film or the sensor for very long, so not a lot of light is going to reach that, but it's going to freeze any movement in the actual image itself. So our waterfall wouldn't be this raging torrent, it would be a collection of all these little drops of water. If we were to take the same image at 100th of a second, the film or the sensor will be exposed to more light, and there'll be a lot more movement in the image itself. We wouldn't see the individual droplets of water, we would see like a blurry cascade, a nice smooth waterfall. Now if we were to use a shutter speed of 1 second, the waterfall would be no longer a collection of droplets, nor would it be this continuous stream, it would be more like a ghostly ethereal cloud coming down the rocks. The film or the sensor will be exposed for a very long time, giving us a very, very bright image. The sensitivity, or the ISO, controls how receptive or reactive the film or the sensor is to light. Now you can use a very low ISO, say 100 or 200 during the day, and that's going to be okay outdoors. Indoors you're going to want to use something like ISO 1600 or ISO 3200 to make the film or the sensor a lot more reactive to light, allowing you to take pictures in a very dark environment. However, as with the other settings, it does have a secondary feature or function. That is, the higher the sensitivity, the more noise or grain you're going to get in the image. Now it's worth saying that each of these three settings can be controlled individually. We can set our camera to, say, aperture priority mode. We can go outside and we can try different apertures out to see what it does to our images. We can see how the depth of field works, and we can basically play. In aperture priority mode, the camera will change the shutter speed automatically, and the ISO to give us a well-exposed image. So we don't have to worry about the other 2 points of the triangle. And it's the same for the shutter speed. If we want to just control our shutter speed, we can set the camera to shutter priority mode, and we don't have to worry about the aperture or the ISO. The camera is going to take care of that for us. As far as the ISO is concerned, normally I would use one of these cameras, and I would set it to ISO automatic 100 to 1600 and basically forget about it. Unless I'm going somewhere quite specific, like I'd be indoors or I'd be taking a picture of a play where there's going to be not a lot of light, then I would choose a specific ISO. So there we have it, a very basic introduction to the exposure triangle. In future, I'll probably come back and look at each of the settings individually. But for the time being, I'd say just use one of the priority modes, take your camera and just play. See what you can and can't do with each of the settings. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful or informative in any way, please consider subscribing. Also, check out some of the other videos on the channel, and I will catch you next time.